A letter from Captain Gulliver to his cousin Sympson. Written in the year 1727. I hope you will be ready to own publicly, whenever you shall be called to it, that by your great and frequent urgency, you prevailed on me to publish a very loose and incorrect account of my travels, with direction to hire some young gentlemen of either university to put them in order, and correct the style, as my cousin Dampier did, by my advice, in his book called A Voyage round the World. But I do not remember I gave you power to consent that anything should be omitted, and much less that anything should be inserted. Therefore, as to the latter, I do here renounce everything of that kind, particularly a paragraph about Her Majesty Queen Anne, of most pious and glorious memory, although I did reverence and esteem her more than any of the human species. But you, or your interpolator, ought to have considered that, as it was not my inclination, so was it not decent to praise any animal of our composition before my master Houyhnhnm, and, besides, the fact was altogether false, for to my knowledge, being in England during some part of Her Majesty's reign, she did govern by a chief minister, nay, even by two successively, the first whereof was the Lord of Godolphin, and the second the Lord of Oxford, so that you have made me say the thing. That was not. Likewise, in the account of the Academy of Projectors, and several passages of my discourse to my master Houyhnhnm, you have either omitted some material circumstances, or minced or changed them in such a manner that I could hardly know my own work. When I formerly hinted to you something of this in a letter, you were pleased to answer that you were afraid of giving offense, that people in power were very watchful over the press, and apt not only to interpret, but to punish everything which looked like an innuendo, as I think you call it. But, pray, how could that which I spoke so many years ago, and at about 5,000 leagues distance, in another reign, be applied to any of the yahoos who now are said to govern the herd, especially at a time when I little thought or feared the unhappiness of living under them? Have not I the most reason to complain, when I see these very yahoos carried by hounds in a vehicle, as if these were brutes, and those the rational creatures? And, indeed, to avoid so monstrous and detestable a sight was one principal motive of my retirement hither. Thus much I thought proper to tell you in relation to yourself, and to the trust one reposed in you. I do, in the next place, complain of my own great want of judgment, in being prevailed upon, by the entreaties and false reasonings of you and some others, very much against my own opinion, to suffer my travels to be published. Pray bring to your mind how often I desired you to consider, when you insisted on the motive of public good, that the yahoos were a species of animals utterly incapable of amendment by precepts or example, and so it has proved. For, instead of seeing a full stop put to all abuses and corruptions, at least in this little island, as I had reason to expect, behold, after about 6 months' warning, I cannot learn that my book has produced one single effect according to my intentions. I desired you would let me know, by a letter, when party and faction were extinguished, judges learned and upright, pleaders honest and with some tincture of common sense, and Smithfield blazing with pyramids of law books, the young nobility's education entirely changed, the physicians banished, the female yawms abounding in virtue, honor, truth, and good sense, courts and levees of gazette ministers thoroughly weeded and swept, wit, merit, and learning rewarded, all disgracers of the press, in prose and verse, condemned to eat nothing but their own cotton, and quench their thirst with these, and 1,000 other reformations, I firmly counted upon by your encouragement, as, indeed, they were plainly deducible from the precepts delivered in my book. And it must be owned, that 7 months were a sufficient time to correct every vice and folly to which yahoos are subject, if their nature had been capable of the least disposition to virtue or wisdom. Yet, so far have you been from answering my expectation in any of your letters, that, on the contrary, you are loading our carrier every week with libels, and keys, and reflections, and memoirs, and second parts, wherein I see myself accused of reflecting upon great state folks, of degrading human nature, for so they have still the confidence to style it, and of abusing the female sex. I find, likewise, that the writers of those bundles are not agreed among themselves, for some of them will not allow me to be the author of my own travels, and others make me author of books to which I am wholly a stranger. I find, likewise, that your printer has been so careless as to confound the times, and mistake the dates, of my several voyages and returns, neither assigning the true year, nor the true month, nor the day of the month, and I hear the original manuscript is all destroyed since the publication of my book, neither have I any copy left. However, I have sent you some corrections, which you may insert, if ever there should be a second edition, and yet I cannot stand to them, but shall leave that matter to my judicious and candid readers, to adjust it as they please. I hear some of our sea yahoos find fault with my sea language, as not proper in many parts, nor now in use. I cannot help it. In my first voyages, while I was young, I was instructed by the oldest mariners, and learned to speak as they did. But I have since found that the sea yahoos are apt, like the land ones, to become newfangled in their words, which the latter change every year, in so much, as I remember, upon each return to my own country, their old dialect was so altered that I could hardly understand the new. And I observe, when any yahoos come from London, out of curiosity, to visit me at my house, we neither of us are able to deliver our conceptions in a manner intelligible to the other. If the censure of the yahoos could anyway affect me, I should have great reason to complain that some of them are so bold as to think my book of travels a mere fiction out of mine own brain, and have gone so far as to drop hints that the Houyhnhnms and yahoos have no more existence than the inhabitants of Utopia. Indeed, I must confess that as to the people of Lilliput, Brobdingrag, for so the word should have been spelt, and not erroneously, Brobdingnacker, and Laputa, I have never yet heard of any Yahoo so presumptuous as to dispute their being, or the facts I have related concerning them, because the truth immediately strikes every reader with conviction. And is there less probability in my account of the Houyhnhnms or Yahoos, when it is manifest, as to the latter, there are so many thousands, even in this country, who only differ from their brother brutes in Houyhnhnm land, because they use a sort of jabber, and do not go naked? I wrote for their amendment, and not their approbation. The united praise of the whole race would be of less consequence to me than the neighing of these two degenerate Houyhnhnms I keep in my stable, because from these, degenerate as they are, I still improve in some virtues, without any mixture of vice. Do these miserable animals presume to think that I am so degenerated as to defend my veracity? Yahoo as I am, it is well known through all Houyhnhnm land, that by the instructions and example of my illustrious master, I was able, in the compass of 2 years, although I confess with the utmost difficulty, to remove that infernal habit of lying, shuffling, deceiving, and equivocating, so deeply rooted in the very souls of all my species, especially the Europeans.